Welcome to another public live stream session, and we got a big update from the Federal Reserve in about 10 minutes on the decision on whether they're going to pause the interest rate hike or raise another 25 basis points. Anyway, so the Fed funds rate right now, as we're seeing, is at 5 to 5.25%. And since March of 2022, if you look at it all the way down here, right, the Fed has been consistently raising interest rates without any pauses. If you look all the way back, like I said, all the way back in March 2022, they raised 25 basis points. And in May, they raised 50 points. In June, July, September, and November, the Fed raised 75 basis points from each of those FOMC meetings, which went from 1% to 4% in a matter of 6 months. In December, they raised 50 points. But starting in February, they've been consistently raising interest rates by 25 basis points. The Fed funds rate before the decision comes out is currently, like I said, between 5 and 5.25%. Could the Fed pause rate hikes after yesterday's CPI data with the headline CPI at 4.0% and core CPI at 5.3%? Quite possibly. And the chances of that happening is 70% right now. And that's what the market is pricing in. And inflation has significantly cooled down since 2022. A lot of Wall Street investors are seeing 60, 70% probability of the target rate ending the year in the 5% to 5.25% range. And they're also predicting that the range is going to change from 3.75% to 4% by November 2024. So what that means is that we could see a decrease in interest rate by 125 basis points or 1.25%, right? And I'm going to pull up the summary of the economic projection as soon as it's released at 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time and 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And just so you know what to expect from this live stream, I'll try to answer as many questions in the live chat as possible, like saying hi to, it says IHOP, okay? Hi. And you can also send me a DM on Facebook since this is being live streamed on both YouTube and my Facebook page. And first, I'm going to briefly go over the housing market using the Redfin data before the Fed announces its decision. And in about 10 minutes or at 11 a.m. Pacific time or 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we're going to find out the Fed's decision to either raise the interest rates or pause at 5 to 5.25% Fed's fund rate. And then 10 minutes later, I'm going to go over the latest version of the summary of the economic projections, which comes out every quarter to show us the GDP projections, unemployment rate, PC inflation, and core PC inflation projections. The document will show us if we're seeing a hawkish Fed or a dovish Fed. Those are what's called the dots to indicate a chart of individual voting members' expectations of where rates are headed from now on. And are they looking to raise more interest rates in 2023, 2024, and 2025? I'm going to show you the chart and explain to you what the Federal Reserve Committee is thinking about. Jerome Powell alone doesn't make decisions on interest rates. We're going to see 18 dots that represent the FOMC participants' assessments of the monetary policy, and some of them may be leaning more to 5 to 5.25% for the year 2023, and some of them may be leaning more hawkish on 5.5 to 5.75% or even 6%. And we'll see what it says when the document comes out. And at 11:30 a.m. Pacific time and 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Jerome Powell will be at the press conference, and I'm going to be live streaming his press conference. And this is when he gets all the questions from the reporters. And I'll be curious to see the the reason behind the decision by the Fed and what they're going to do moving forward. Anyway, the stock market right now is priced in for a rate pause for the month of June. And if they do decide to pause the interest rate hike, then I would expect Jerome Powell to emphasize that just because they paused the rate hike, it doesn't mean that they're done hiking, right? And I'm 99% positive that he's going to be very explicit about that statement. If the Fed decides to raise interest rates by another 25 basis points, I would expect the stock market to price itself to the 5.25% to 5.5% Fed funds rate, because the possibility of a recession is still there with the constant rate hike, as I showed you earlier. There's still a possibility that the Fed could raise other interest rates in the July FOMC meeting if the CPI data comes out hotter than expected. And this is why I want to pay attention to page 4 of the summary of the economic projections to see if those dots are mostly sitting between 5 and 5.25%, or if they're sitting at 5.25% to 5.5%. And the last summary showed 10 dots on 5 to 5.25%. So we'll see if any of those dots have moved in the June edition. And if they do raise another 25 basis points today, the biggest question is if this is going to create more pressure on those smaller banks and potentially go into more crisis like those banks did a few months ago. And the PPI, or the Producer Price Index, let me show you that real quick. The Producer Price Index today came out this morning, and it was showing some deflationary indication, okay? So this report, in my opinion, is already screaming rate pause, rate pause, rate pause to the Federal Reserve. The egg prices, you will be very pleased to hear that, fell at the steepest rate since 1951, or by 14%. And so we can afford to buy eggs now again. And according to this report, the US wholesales prices fell 0.3% versus a 0.1% decline from what was originally forecasted. The increase in wholesales prices over the past 12 months slowed again to 1.1% from 2.3% in the prior month, which is the lowest reading since December 2020. So again, I would be very surprised if the Fed decides to hike interest rates again in the June FOMC meeting. So why do we care about I am not interviewing Jerome Powell. No, I wish, but I would like to ask him some questions. Though I would have some questions of my own. But the biggest thing about the Fed raising interest rates or pausing interest rates, I'm really interested in the real estate market going into 2024 and 2025. If as soon as they start lowering interest rates, I would expect probably down to 3.5 to maybe 4.25% for the Fed funds rate. The best case scenario is in 2025, they lower interest rates all the way back down to 2%. Could we see another 1%, 1.25%? That's a possibility. If we see a recession going into the second half of 2023 or maybe going into 2024, then I could see the Federal Reserve cutting interest rates to boost the economy, right? So it's always going in waves when you look at the whole chart. So this is going to be very, very interesting to see. So we have 5 minutes left. So before the Fed's decision, I do want to show you just real quick. A lot of you guys have been asking me about the financial independence resources. So you go to my website at firesidechat.com/resources, and you can download all of my resources for absolutely free by visiting firesidechat.com/resources. The only thing you have to fill out is your name, email, and some other surveys on how you found my channel. I don't ask for your credit card information or anything like that because I believe financial education and resources should be free to you. You can download my 401k spreadsheets, Roth IRA, debt payoff plan, and so many more, right? So let me show you what you will see in my folder just real quick. When you get that email link, you're going to get a link to my Google Drive. So you're going to get all kinds of spreadsheets from like emergency fund, annual expenses, HSA calculator, FSA calculator, retirement calculator, TSP 401k calculator. So if you go to my YouTube channel, you're going to see all the tutorials on how to use these spreadsheets. It gives you an idea of how much you invest each month, and this is how much you're going to have, a estimated amount in 20 years or 30 years with a 7% average annual return. So just play around with those spreadsheets and let me, just give me some feedback if you have any. Okay. And if you go to my firesidechat.com/affiliates, and I want to be completely transparent with you. My business makes money from YouTube AdSense, from you guys watching my videos. Okay. A very select few sponsors and affiliate programs. And if you're curious about how I grew my YouTube channel from 700 subscribers to almost 11,000 subscribers in a year, you can visit firesidechat.com/affiliates. If you click on the Amazon link here, and it's going to show you a list of my video equipment to make this live stream happen and engage with every one of you. And I'm using StreamYard right now, and it's by far the easiest software to go live on YouTube, Facebook, and other platforms at the same time. And if you go to firesidechat.com/coaching, I have a private client program to help individuals and couples get out of debt, invest, and plan for their financial futures. But before they become my clients, I do what's called an introductory call for either 20 minutes or 30 minutes. Those call slots are, they're very limited because they're very popular, but just go to firesidechat.com/coaching to schedule your complimentary coaching session to find out if I'm the right fit for your needs. Okay. And after we have a complimentary coaching session, then you can choose the hourly rate, private group coaching sessions, or long-term financial plan. If you want to work on your financial planning for the next 6 months to a year, you can just go to firesidechat.com/pricing to view our rates and prices. Anyway, I had a couple recently, and I want to give them a shout out without telling them the name, but they just paid off $22,800 in debt in just 7 months. And now they're working on their long-term retirement plan and saving up their emergency fund. And I'm super proud of them because they did all the work. And I just guided them to find the fastest way to pay off their debt. And they didn't use the debt consolidation plan or anything like that. They repaid every single dollar that they owe from credit cards, buy now, pay later, and a car loan. And when it comes to personal finances, it is all about your behavior, right? So we're about 20 seconds until the updates come in. So let me not go crazy and find out what is going on here. Okay, so yesterday when the CPI report came out, the CPI, the website actually crashed. Of all places, the government website always crashes, right? So that's all. I thought that was really, really funny. All right, let me see. Press release. Not released yet. Let me know in the comment section down below where you're from, where you're hitting me up from, what you're more curious about. All right, statements out. Rate pause. They have decided to pause the interest rates as we all projected. So let me go ahead and show this to you. All right, so the FOMC statement. The recent indicators suggest the economic activity has continued to expand at a modest pace. Job gains have been robust in recent months, and the unemployment rate has remained low. Inflation remains elevated. Blah, blah, blah. Target all right, at the rate of 2% over the long run. We know that. The committee decided to maintain the target range for the federal funds rate at 5 to 5.25%. Holding the target range steady at this meeting allows the committee to assess additional information and its implications for monetary policy. In determining the extent of additional policy firming that may be appropriate to return inflation to 2% over time, the committee will take into account the cumulative tightening of monetary policy, the lags with, okay, all right, all the junk. All right, let's take a look. In assessing the appropriate stance of monetary policy, the committee will continue to monitor the implications of incoming information for the economic outlook. Okay, sweet. So they have decided, and I want to take a look. I want to hear what Bloomberg is saying. Okay, let me show you here. Bloomberg. Share. Oh, I gotta unmute.
Higher versus the dollar, 108.57, breaking out as people expect them to make a move, even if the Fed does not.
I'm going to look at the 2-year yield to 4 digits, 4.6286 for those writing down. Lisa, why don't you take us over to the festivities of Mr. McKee here in 30 seconds.
Mr. McKee is checking in as we speak. I am also watching the
I'm going to pull up the
space,
summary of economic projections while we're all watching that.
Look, under 69.
Yeah, exactly. Wow. Under 69 as people parse through some of the inventories that are picking up. We are about to get some words from the Federal Reserve as they embark on a pivot point of potential inflation, disinflation, and then potentially the end of a hiking cycle after raising rates by 500 basis points. Let's head over to Michael McKee now with the latest. Mike.
We have a super hawkish skip. A unanimous Fed, no dissents, leaves the benchmark rate at 5 to 5.25%. However, the new dot plot shows a new terminal rate of 5.6%, which would be.
I'm reading that right now, and I'm going to show you guys that in a moment.
At least 150. 12 of the 18 members of the committee see rates at that level or above. One sees 6.25%. 4 see rates moving up only 25 basis points, but only 2 see no change between now and the end of the year. In their statement, the officials say, holding the target range steady at this meeting allows the committee to assess additional information and its implications for monetary policy. But the very next sentence leads us into it with saying, instead of saying, in determining the extent to which additional firming may be appropriate, it now reads, in determining the extent of additional policy firming that may be appropriate. There are also significant changes to the economic assumptions. Unemployment this year projected to reach only 4.1%, down from 4.5%, 4.5% next year, and in 2025, down from 4.6%. Growth revised up this year to 1% from 0.4%, and lowered by 0.1% in the next 2 years. PCE inflation forecast at 3.2%, down from 3.3% this year. Core PCE is revised up this year to 3.9 from 1.36. There are almost no significant changes in inflation for the next 2 years. The federal funds rate will be cut, but not until next year, the summary shows. It will be a big cut as well, a full percentage point in 2024, going to 4.6% by the end of next year. They see rates falling to 3.4% in 2025. The statement says the economy has continued to expand at a modest pace, but job gains have been robust and inflation remains elevated. While the banking system is sound and resilient, they do expect tighter credit conditions will weigh on economic activity, hiring, and inflation. The extent of those effects remains uncertain, it says. And finally, there are no changes to QT, the $95 billion a month roll-off, to repo or reverse repo rates or to counterparty caps.
I think what's important here, folks, in the multiple decades that I've known Michael McKee, rarely have I heard that tone of the McKee voice. He has huge perspective on this. And to see the 2-year yield, Karen, if you can bring up the 2-year yield right now, which only can be captured by a 14 basis point move to high yields. The y-axis on the 2-year yield right now, extraordinary. Equities give back fractionally, but the yield move here, Lisa, is Mike, stay with us. The yield move here, Lisa, is extraordinary.
They're getting the message loud and clear. The Fed wants to go again, and maybe quite significantly. But this from Drew Mattis of MetLife, he writes in and says, if they knew they were going to be able to go, they would have gone. If they were so convinced that they would need to raise rates significantly higher, carpe diem. Why not today?
I mean, Michael McKee, we're really an historic dot plot and projection study that you just said. Can you say that this is the first time, Michael McKee, where we begin to frame something in the vicinity of 6% for short paper?
Well, it's the first time you get anybody suggesting that. We're now over 6% to 6.25% for at least one member, and two think we're going to go somewhere in between that. So it does look like we're putting it into the ballpark, but still the majority think we're going to end up at 5.6, which is still a significant 2 moves.
Wow.
Honestly,
this is pretty
I just
insane.
keep going back to this
I'm
idea.
going to go over the
if they wanted
FOMC
to hike
summary
eventually and possibly twice more,
economic
today,
projections
the
here, but I've
reassessment
been
and
reading this,
potentially
and
the
this is
concern
pretty
out there.
insane.
Michael McKee, stick with us. We'll be coming back to you as we do see markets on the move, very much readjusting to a reality where they possibly want to raise rates by 2 more times. Just to put this in a perspective, this is the first pause in Fed policy in 15 months. That is where we are. After starting on March 2022 and having raised 500 basis points, they did not raise rates, Tom. And you are seeing, though, there are indications of further rate hikes being bled out into markets, setting them lower.
And there's what we talked about this morning as well. This afternoon, the Fed says the FOMC vote was unanimous. At this historic moment, it is good to speak with Diane Swank, Chief Economist, KPMG, with all sorts of experience here out of Michigan and Midwest and Chicago economics. Diane, what in God's name is going on? Should they have just raised rates?
I actually think that they're really concerned. It's the tension within the Fed that Julia referred to earlier in terms of the diversity of views. Chairman Powell is much more skittish about what's going to happen in the financial markets and stresses in the financial sector, the banking sector in particular, and not wanting to go too far. That said, this is a Fed that is committed to additional rate hikes. The tricky part of this pause or skip, the Waller skip, as we call it, was messaging it. And this was a very effective way to message.
The stock market really hates with the report.
I want to add that much of financial markets have ignored that many central banks around the world that had paused have had to reassess and go back in. Bank of Australia, the Reserve Bank of Australia, the Bank of Canada in the recent week, ECB, all of these banks looking to think that they were close to a terminal rate, now reassessing that. And I think the Fed doesn't want to look like any pause that it takes is behind the curve and not continuing that process.
In the blur of emotion there from Mike McKee and the data of the projections, Diane Swank, was this a Fed of a single mandate? Have they basically said we can't opine on labor because we're solidly under 4%?
There is clearly a view that labor markets are extremely tight. They acknowledge that. I'm not at all surprised by the upward revisions to the forecasting growth. The idea that they're still going to get to 4.5% on the unemployment rate, although mild recession is still this sort of softish landing kind of scenario they're trying to reach for. But when you start looking at the other issues on rate hikes, on how many rate hikes are even in excess of 0.5% in this year, that really gets to the core of the issue of how hawkish they think they're going to have to be to derail what's become a more persistent global inflation, underlying inflation.
After the shock of this, folks, equities deteriorate down negative 346, SPX down. It's okay, Dan. I cough like that all the time. SPX down 0.5%. And I really want to say that the 2-year yield, my litmus paper this afternoon, continues to move to a higher yield. We've got a shocking 16, almost 17 basis point move. That's a ginormous move for those keeping.
Shocking is an understatement. And I'm going to show you what they're talking about right now with the documents. This is pretty, very, very unexpected. And I am very shocked at their decision. I mean, why not just raise the interest rates today, right? But now they're talking about raising interest rates again in July and in September FOMC meetings. So we're seeing a lot of deflationary indications right now, but they're really, really like they want to raise more interest rates. And I'm going to show you the documents here. But before I get into that, I wanted to take a look at the FOMC meeting. So the next FOMC meeting is going to be July 25th and 26th of July 25th and 26th, and then September 19th and 20th will be the FOMC meeting after July. So there's nothing in August. So, and for the CPI to be released, so for the June CPI, it's going to be released on July 12th, which is about 2 weeks before the FOMC meeting, and then we're going to see 2 more CPI data. On August 10th for the July CPI data, and then the September 13th for the August CPI. So, I don't know what the Fed is thinking right now, but this is very, very shocking, and the market is reacting negatively. And so just to summarize real quick, the central bank, so right now they're maintaining that 5 to 5.25%, right? So they're not raising interest rates right now, okay? But they are looking to raise another 25 basis points in July, and then another 25 basis points possibly in September. So I'm going to show you this real quick. Let me see, window. Okay, so if you've been live streaming since the beginning, this is what I showed you guys in the beginning of the live stream. So since March, they've been raising interest rates, right? So 25 basis points, and then 50, 75, and then down to 50 in December, 25, 25, 25. So right now we're looking at 5% to 5.25%. Now, this is what they came out with. These are the dots that I was telling you guys about. So this is how you read it, all right? So you know what? I'm going to start from the beginning so you guys can read it on your own too. So anyway, this is what's called the summary of economic projections. And it comes out every quarter, March, June, September, and then December, okay? So it tells you like their projections on the GDP, unemployment, PC inflation, and all that, okay? So I'm going to scroll down and just look at the dots real quick. So, and I was talking about this in yesterday's CPI reading, but if you're on a mobile device or on your iPad, you can actually pinch and zoom in to the screen. And if you can't read what I'm reading to you, you can just pinch and zoom in on the screen, and you can actually take a look at the whatever documents that I'm reading to you. Okay, that's something I learned like maybe last week, and somebody else told me about that. I'm like, oh, that's a pretty cool function. But anyway, all right, so here are the dots. So Here is 2023. Okay, so you scroll all the way to the bottom and you're going to see 2023, 2024, 2025, and then the longer run. I never care about the longer run. All right, that's like constantly changing. Anyway, so for 2023, 10 dots in the last summary were between 5% and 5.25%. But now take a look at this. Okay, so if you look on the right side, you'll see 6% to 5% to 6%. Okay, nobody on the committee is below 5% anymore. Right now, you only see 2 dots. So that means 2 members of the FOMC are sitting between 5% to 5.25%. Okay, that makes sense so far, right? So, but look at this. 4 members now moved up to 5.25 to 5.5%. And then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 9 members are sitting at between 5.5 and 5.75%. Okay, so that tells me that a majority of the FOMC committee want to raise interest rates by 50 more basis points or 0.5%. And these are the 3 people, the 2 people that are sitting between 5.75 and 6%. And there's that one person, we don't know who it is sitting above 6% and 6.25%. Probably not going to get there, okay? And going into 2024, so if you scroll all the way down, it says 2024, right? And you just scroll up to the bracket, there's one person sitting at between 3.5 and 3.75%. And then the rest of most of them are sitting between 4 and 5%. So they're really, really hawkish in 2023. So we're still 6 months left in the year, and half of them still want to raise more interest rates. Anyway, so 2024, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So 6 people are still sitting above 5 to 6% Fed funds rate, but over half of them are sitting between 4 and 5%. In 2025, I kind of ignore those because those projections are way too far out as far as what they're going to do. But most of them are going down below 4%. So I'm going to talk about real estate in a little bit, but my wife and I have been eyeing on real estate, and the target year has been 2025, because after reading these summaries, I think the interest rates will drop to between 3 and 4% in 2025. And that would be a really great year for us to start purchasing real estate properties. So yeah, so this is what the stock market was waiting for, was these dots, and to show what they're really thinking about, right? And Jerome Powell is going to be doing the live press conference in about 13 minutes. So we're going to find out what he's going to say about the report. And there's going to be even more negative reaction in the stock market, or maybe positive reaction if he has a more of a dovish tone, right? Hawkish means, they want to raise more interest rates, and the dovish means, they want to lower interest rates, if you're brand new to this. But yeah, this is very surprising. So now I'm going to scroll up and take a look at the summary here on the projections. Okay, so on page 2, this is probably the most important page here. And let me see if I can just open it in Adobe here. Stand by 1 second. Let me see if I can do it. Usually have some problems with Adobe, but I'm just going to give it a shot real quick. And if it doesn't work, and it doesn't work, so then the only problem is on Google Chrome, I can't really highlight it. So it's kind of hard for me to try to explain things, so let me see if I can do this. Please work. If you're just tuning in, really appreciate you guys being here. Let me know where you guys are from in the chat. Love to get to know you. Please work. Okay, should work. I think it's gonna work. It worked. All right, cool. Here we go. All right, so highlight. There we go. All right, sweet. There we go. All right, so you see in the 2023 change in real GDP. Now it was 0.4% down here. Okay, I'm gonna zoom in even more. There we go. This is a page 2 of the summary. You know what? This is terrible. Let me see what I can do with this. Okay. Sorry about this. See if this works. There we go. Again, if you can't see this, just pinch on your device and you can zoom in even more. Okay, and I'll try to minimize the movement as much as I can. So in this one, right now, the change in real GDP is 1%. That's increased from 0.4% in the March summary of economic projections. Okay, and now the unemployment rate has decreased from 4.5% to 4.1%. Let me see if I can highlight this. Can I? I can't highlight it. Man, this is dumb. All right, so 4.5 to 4.1%. Okay, so and then for PCE inflation, it is just slightly decreased from 3.3 to 3.2%, and then core PCE inflation has actually increased from 3.6 to 3.9%, and the Fed funds rate increased from 5.1 to 5.6%, and that's what Bloomberg was just talking about on the news. Is that wow? This is actually they've increased the Fed funds rate for 2023 and became even more hawkish. Okay, so let me see here. How do I? There's a way for me to do it. Forget it. Okay. So right here, if you take a look at the federal funds rate, can you? So if you look at range, I'm gonna try to scroll as slowly as I can. So if you look at range on the far right side, okay, and it's gonna say 5.1% to 6.1%. That's gonna be the second row from the bottom, fourth one from the right. Okay, and it says 2023. So 5.1% to 6.1%, which is a significant increase from 4.9% to 5.9%. All right. So how is this going to affect you? Your most likely your mortgage rates will go up if they raise another 25 to 50 basis points. If you have your mortgage rate locked in, that doesn't matter anymore. Your credit card interest rates, if you have a balance on your credit card, those interest rates will for sure go up. Okay, and the personal loans, car loans, student loans, if you're going to get one, those fixed interest rates are absolutely going to go up too. So we'll see what this is kind of concerning because I'm not sure what the Fed is trying to do. So okay. Oh, Vegas, retiring military soon, looking to get smarter on market economy. Me too. I am not the smartest person in the room. I try to be. All right, let me take a look here. All right, I'm gonna tune in CNBC in a little bit and show you guys. Actually, maybe Bloomberg is going to be live streaming too. So probably just going to show you guys Bloomberg when Chair Powell goes on the press conference. All right, cool. All right, I'm going to review real estate real quick because this has direct ties to how I want to purchase real estate in the future here. So, all right. I'm going to pull up the Redfin data just real quick before the press conference. Oh, man, this is pretty insane, huh? All right. All right, so we've been living in a high interest rate economy for a while now. The average home prices in the US right now are still as high as August 2022 or almost 10 months ago. So let me show you this. On the Redfin home data, you can just Google Redfin US home data chart, okay? And as of April 2023, the median sale price here is at $407,415, and it has been climbing since January from $381,994 to $407,000. The year-over-year number is still down by 4.1%, but it's still not down as much as many people, including myself, had predicted. And if I click on the number of homes sold here, supply. Actually, I need to scroll down. Okay, number of homes sold. It is still down about 25% year over year. But if you look at the numbers since January, the number of homes sold has increased from 277,000 to 477,000 in March, and then dropped to 412,000 in April. The home data for May should come out in a few days. So why is this happening when the average mortgage rates have been between on an average of 6% and 7%? The real reason is the inventory level. Now, you have to keep in mind that the housing market will depend on the demand and inventory based on the city and town. There are cities like Tampa that are still considered one of the hottest housing markets. So if you look at the number of newly listed homes under the US housing supply, this number is very low if you compare it to the previous year and the year before. Okay. So right here. Okay. So typically people list their homes in summer because that's when people move the most. And if you look at the winter months for the last 5 years, every single year in November, December, and January, those numbers always dip because of the holiday season. And I always say that winter months are always the best months to buy a house, but the worst time to sell a house. But what's really alarming is that the number of homes that are listed in April and May has always been around 700,000 or 800,000. But this year, we're only seeing a little over 500,000. So what this tells me is that people are choosing to hold on to their homes with a really low interest rate that they locked in at 2.5 or 3% back in 2020 and 2021. Let me know in the comment section down below what your mortgage rates are. Okay. And I'm in the same boat because I refinanced my home to a 2.9% 30-year fixed mortgage rate at the end of 2020. And I bought this house back in 2014 for $180,000. And there's no way I can find a house with this price in 2023. But do I want to move out of my current house with a $800 mortgage payment and move into a house with a 7% interest rate paying like something like a $2,000 mortgage payment? Most likely not, right? And I would need to have a significant down payment of 30% or even 40% to reduce the mortgage payment. And if you're not ready to buy a house, do not buy a house. And I understand that not everyone's situation is the same. The rental prices in your area might be similar to your mortgage payments. And I totally get that. When you rent, you're not going to be able to enjoy tax deductions, and your rent will likely grow from year to year. And renting in the long term is basically wasting money, but renting in the short term is smart if you have debt or don't have the cash flow to make your mortgage payments. What you don't want to do is buy a house by taking out a mortgage without properly planning for it. And I always suggest limiting your mortgage payment to 25% of your gross monthly income. And if you pay more than 25% of your monthly income, then you're going to have a very hard time saving or investing money. It's going to be mathematically difficult. And by no means am I discouraging you from buying a house. Again, if you're ready to buy a house with a mortgage payment that's less than 25% of your gross income, I would say go for it. But you want to make sure that's the house you want to live in and stay in for the next 7 years or longer. You also don't want to overpay for your house, or you're not going to have any room to invest in your retirement. So let me know in the comment section down below what your thoughts are on the real estate market in a high interest rate economy. All right. All right. So the press conference should be happening right now. I'm going to go to Bloomberg. Wait, maybe CNBC. One sec. No, I'll go to CNBC. Well, he's late. Okay. Star set. Where are you stationed at? What branch of the military are you in?
Good afternoon. My colleagues and I remain squarely focused on our dual mandate to promote maximum employment and stable prices for the American people. We understand the hardship that high inflation is causing, and we remain strongly committed to bringing inflation back down to our 2% goal. Price stability is the responsibility of the Federal Reserve. Without price stability, the economy doesn't work for anyone. In particular, without price stability, we will not achieve a sustained period of strong labor market conditions that benefit all. Since early last year, the FOMC has significantly tightened the stance of monetary policy. We have raised our policy interest rate by 5 percentage points, and we've continued to reduce our securities holdings at a brisk pace. We've covered a lot of ground, and the full effects of our tightening have yet to be felt. In light of how far we've come in tightening policy, the uncertain lags with which monetary policy affects the economy, and potential headwinds from credit tightening, today we decided to leave our policy interest rate unchanged and to continue to reduce our securities holdings. Looking ahead, nearly all committee participants view it as likely that some further rate increases will be appropriate this year to bring inflation down to 2% over time. And I will have more to say about monetary policy after briefly reviewing economic developments. The U.S. economy slowed significantly last year, and recent indicators suggest that economic activity has continued to expand at a modest pace. Although growth in consumer spending has picked up this year, activity in the housing sector remains weak, largely reflecting higher mortgage rates. Higher interest rates and slower output growth also appear to be weighing on business fixed investment. Committee participants generally expect subdued growth to continue. In our summary of economic projections, the median projection has real GDP growth at 1.0% this year and 1.1% next year, well below the median estimate of the longer run normal growth rate. The labor market remains very tight. Over the past 3 months, payroll job gains averaged a robust 283,000 jobs per month. The unemployment rate moved up but remained low in May at 3.7%. There are some signs that supply and demand in the labor market are coming into better balance. The labor force participation rate has moved up in recent months, particularly for individuals aged 25 to 54 years. Nominal wage growth has shown signs of easing, and job vacancies have declined so far this year. While the jobs to workers gap has declined, labor demand still substantially exceeds the supply of available workers. FOMC participants expect supply and demand conditions in the labor market to come into better balance over time, easing upward pressures on inflation. The median unemployment rate projection in the SEP rises to 4.1% at the end of this year and 4.5% at the end of next year. Inflation remains well above our longer-run 2% goal. Over the 12 months ending in April, total PCE prices rose 4.4%, excluding the volatile food and energy categories. Core PCE prices rose 4.7%. In May, the 12-month change in the Consumer Price Index came in at 4%, and the change in the core CPI was 5.3%. Inflation has moderated somewhat since the middle of last year. Nonetheless, inflation pressures continue to run high, and the process of getting inflation back down to 2% has a long way to go. The median projection in the SEP for total PCE inflation is 3.2% this year, 2.5% next year, and 2.1% in 2025. Core PCE inflation, which excludes volatile food and energy prices, is projected to run higher than total inflation, and the median projection has been revised in the SEP up to 3.9% this year. Despite elevated inflation, longer-term inflation expectations appear to remain well anchored, as reflected in a broad range of surveys of households, businesses, and forecasters, as well as measures from financial markets. The Fed's monetary policy actions are guided by our mandate to promote maximum employment and stable prices for the American people. My colleagues and I are acutely aware that high inflation imposes hardship as it erodes purchasing power, especially for those least able to meet the higher costs of essentials like food, housing, and transportation. We are highly attentive to the risks that high inflation poses to both sides of our mandate, and we are strongly committed to returning inflation to our 2% objective. As I noted earlier, since early last year, we have raised our policy rate by 5 percentage points. We have been seeing the effects of our policy tightening on demand in the most interest rate sensitive sectors of the economy, especially housing and investment. It will take time, however, for the full effects of monetary restraint to be realized, especially on inflation. The economy is facing headwinds from tighter credit conditions for households and businesses, which are likely to weigh on economic activity, hiring, and inflation. The extent of these effects remains uncertain. In light of how far we've come in tightening policy, the uncertain lags with which monetary policy affects the economy, and potential headwinds from credit tightening, the committee decided at today's meeting to maintain the target range for the federal funds rate at 5 to 5.25%, and to continue the process of significantly reducing our securities holdings. As I noted earlier, nearly all committee participants expect that it will be appropriate to raise interest rates somewhat further by the end of the year. But at this meeting, considering how far and how fast we've moved, we judged it prudent to hold the target range steady to allow the committee to assess additional information and its implications for monetary policy. In determining the extent of additional policy firming that may be appropriate to return inflation to 2% over time, the committee will take into account the cumulative tightening of monetary policy, the lags with which monetary policy affects economic activity and inflation, and economic and financial developments. In our SEP, participants wrote down their individual assessments of an appropriate path for the federal funds rate based on what each participant judges to be the most likely scenario going forward. If the economy evolves as projected, the median participant projects that the appropriate level of the federal funds rate will be 5.6% at the end of this year, 4.6% at the end of 2024, and 3.4% at the end of 2025. For the end of this year, the median projection is a 0.5 percentage point higher than in our March projections. I hasten to add, as always, that these projections are not a committee decision or plan. If the economy does not evolve as projected, path for policy will adjust as appropriate to foster our maximum employment and price stability goals. We will continue to make our decisions meeting by meeting based on the totality of incoming data and their implications for the outlook for economic activity and inflation, as well as the balance of risks. We remain committed to bringing inflation back down to our 2% goal and to keeping longer-term inflation expectations well anchored. Reducing inflation is likely to require a period of below-trend growth and some softening of labor market conditions. Restoring price stability is essential to set the stage for achieving maximum employment and stable prices over the longer run. To conclude, we understand that our actions affect communities, families, and businesses across the country. Everything we do at the Fed is in service to our public mission. We will do everything we can to achieve our maximum employment and price stability goals. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Colby Smith with the Financial Times. I'm curious what gives you and the committee the confidence that waiting will not be counterproductive at a time when the monthly pace of core inflation is still so elevated, interest rate sensitive sectors like housing, while they felt the drag of the past Fed actions, have started to recover in some regions, and financial conditions, most recently were easing.
Great question.
So I guess I would go back to the beginning of this tightening cycle to address that. So as we started our rate hikes early last year, we said there were 3 issues that would need to be addressed kind of in sequence. And that of the speed of tightening, the level to which rates would need to go, and then the period of time over which we'd need to keep policy restrictive. So at the outset, going back 15 months, the key issue was how fast to move rates up, and we moved very quickly by historical standards. Then last December, after 4 consecutive 75 basis point hikes, we moderated to a pace of a 50 basis point hike, and then this year to 3 25 basis point hikes at sequential meetings. So it seemed to us to make obvious sense to moderate our rate hikes as we got closer to our destination. So the decision to consider not hiking at every meeting and ultimately to hold rates steady at this meeting, I would just say it's a continuation of that process. The main issue that we're focused on now is determining the extent of additional policy firming that may be appropriate to return inflation to 2% over time. So the pace of the increases and the ultimate level of increases are separate variables. Given how far we have come, it may make sense for rates to move higher, but at a more moderate pace. I want to stress one more thing, and that is that the committee decision made today was only about this meeting. We didn't make any decision about going forward, including what would happen at the next meeting, including we did not decide or really discuss anything about going to an every other meeting kind of an approach or really any other approach. We really were focused on what to do at this meeting.
So there was no kind of initial debate about the possibility of July, any sense of the initial support at this stage for that move?
So again, we didn't make a decision about July. I mean, of course, it came up in the meeting from time to time, but really the focus was on what to do today. I would say about July.
If you see a little bit of lag in the video, I think it's from the CNBC live stream. I'm not seeing any lag from my end, so I know I'm getting that, but I'm not really sure. Maybe I think it is from CNBC.
Thanks, Howard Schneider with Reuters. I was just wondering if you could help us understand the narrative here, because it feels like there's been a level shift in the dots, stronger GDP, less of a hit to unemployment, slower progress on inflation. And I'm wondering, in this sort of, where's the disinflation coming from?
Sure.
The labor market's going to be stronger, it looks like. It's not coming from there. Demand's not coming down all that fast, according to GDP. You've doubled your estimate of GDP. So what's the narrative here? It seems like it's getting more immaculate rather than a little messy.
So you're right that the data came in, I would say, consistent with, but on the high side of expectations. So, and if you go back to the former SEP, the last SEP in March, you will see that growth moved up. These are not huge moves, but growth estimates moved up a bit. Unemployment estimates moved down a bit. Inflation estimates moved up a bit. And, all 3 of those kind of point in the same direction, which is, that perhaps more restraint will be necessary than we had thought at the last meeting. So although the level, frankly, is pretty, the level of 5.6 is pretty consistent if you think about it, where the federal funds rate was trading before the bank incidents of early March. So we've kind of gone back to that. So your question is, where's the disinflation going to come from? And I don't think the story has really changed. The committee has consistently said and believed that the process of getting inflation down is going to be a gradual one. It's going to take some time. And I think you go back to the three-part framework for core PCE inflation, which is, we think, as good an indicator as you can have for where inflation is going forward. You start with goods. With goods, we need to see continued healing in supply side conditions. They've definitely improved a substantial amount, but if you talk to people in business, they will say it's not back to where it was. So that's one thing, and that should enable goods prices to continue, goods inflation to continue to come down over time. In terms of housing services inflation, that's another big piece, and you are seeing there that new rents, new leases are coming in at low levels, and it's really a matter of time as that goes through the pipeline. In fact, I think any forecast that people are making right now about inflation coming down this year will contain a big dose of this year and next year will contain a good amount of disinflation from that source, and that's again probably going to come slower than we would expect. That leaves the big sector, which is a little more than half, pardon me, of the of core PCE inflation. That's non-housing services, and we see only the earliest signs of disinflation there. It's a sector, it's a very broad and diverse sector. I would say in a number of the parts of that sector, the largest cost would be wage costs. It's the service sector, so it's heavily labor intensive. And I think many analysts would say that the key to getting inflation down there is to have a continuing loosening in labor market conditions, which we have seen. We have actually seen, I go through a number of indicators suggesting that there's been some loosening in labor market conditions. We need to see that continue. I would almost say that the conditions that we need to see in place to get inflation down are coming into place. And that would be growth meaningfully below trend. It would be a labor market that's loosening. It would be goods pipelines getting healthier and healthier and that kind of thing. The things are in place that we need to see, but the process of that actually working on inflation is going to take some time.
Nick Timmeros of the Wall Street Journal. Chair Powell, what's the value in pausing?
There seems to be a little lag from CNBC still.
Just hiking now. I mean, not to be flippant, but I don't lose weight just by buying a gym membership. I have to actually go to the gym. 16 of your colleagues put down a higher year-end 23 rate today. The majority of you think you're going to have to go up by 50 basis points this year. So why not just rip off the Band-Aid and raise rates today?
So first, I would say that the question of speed is a separate question from the question from that of level. Okay, so and I think if you look at the SEP, that is our estimate, our individual. It's really accumulation of our individual estimates of how far to go. I mentioned how we got to those numbers. In terms of speed, it's what I said at the beginning, which is speed was very important last year. As we get closer and closer to the destination, and according to the SEP, we're not so far away from the destination in most people's accounting. It's reasonable, it's common sense to go a little slower, just as it was reasonable to go from 75 basis points to 50 to 25 at every meeting. And so the committee thought overall that it was appropriate to moderate the pace, if only slightly. And there are benefits to that. So that gives us more information to make decisions. We may try to make better decisions. I think it allows the economy a little more time to adapt as we make our decisions going forward, and we'll get to see. We don't know the full extent of the consequences of the banking turmoil that we've seen. It would be early to see those, but we don't know what the extent is. We'll have some more time to see that unfold. I mean, it's just the idea that we're trying to get this right, and this is if you think of the two things as separate variables, then I think that the skip, I shouldn't call it a skip, the decision makes sense.
I know you said July is live with only one June employment, with only the June employment and the CPI report for June due to be released before the July meeting. You get the ECI after, you get the senior loan officer survey after, you get some bank earnings at the end of next month. what incremental information will the committee be using to inform their judgment on whether this is in fact a skip or a longer pause?
Well, I think you're adding that to the data that we've seen since the last meeting too. Since we chose to maintain rates at this meeting, it'll really be a 3-month period of data that we can look at. And I think that's a full quarter, and I think you can draw more conclusions from that than you can from any 6-week period. We'll look at those things. We'll also look at the evolving risk picture. We'll look at what's happening in the financial sector. We'll look at all the data, the evolving outlook, and we'll make a decision.
Thanks for taking our questions. Gina Smilik, New York Times. You obviously in your forecast marked up the sort of path for growth, marked down the path for unemployment, marked up the path for inflation pretty notably. I wonder, since March, what has changed to make you think that the economy is a lot more resilient and inflation is going to be a lot more stubborn? And given that, why do you feel confident that this is as high as you're going to have to revise the federal funds rate, or do you think it's possible we could have even a higher than 5.6% terminal by the end of this cycle?
I mean, on the first part, I just think we're following the data and also the outlook. The economy the labor market, I think, has surprised many, if not all, analysts over the last couple of years with its extraordinary resilience, really. It's just remarkable, and that's really, if you think about it, that's what's driving. It's job creation, it's wages moving up, it's supporting spending, which in turn is supporting hiring, and it's really the engine, it seems, that is driving the economy. So it's really the data. In terms of we always write down at these meetings what we think the appropriate terminal rate will be at the end of this year. That's how we do it. It's based on our own individual assessments of what the most likely path of the economy is. It can actually in reality wind up being lower or higher, and there's really no way to know. But it's what people think as of today, and as the data come in, it can move around during the intermeeting period. It could wind up back in the same place, but it really will be data driven. I can't tell you that I ever have a lot of confidence that we can see where the federal funds rate will be that far in advance.
Mr. Chairman, thanks for taking my question. You had said back at the end of May that you thought risks were getting closer to being into balance. Is that still the case, or has your mind changed about the balance of risks out there? And also, could you give us an idea of what would be a sufficiently restrictive funds rate? Obviously the current rate, according to the committee, is not sufficiently restrictive. Is it 5.6? Is it 6? Where's sufficiently restrictive? Thank you.
I would say again that I think that over time, the balance of risks, as we've moved from from interest rates at effectively 0 now to 5 percentage points with an SEP calling for additional hikes, I think we've moved much closer to our destination, which is that sufficiently restrictive rate. And I think that means, almost by definition, that the risks of sort of overdoing it and underdoing it are getting closer to being in balance. I still think, and my colleagues agree, that the risks to inflation are to the upside still. So we don't think we're there with inflation yet, because we're just looking at the data. And if you look at the full range of inflation data, particularly the core data, you just aren't seeing a lot of progress over the last year. Headline, of course, inflation has come down materially, but as you know, we look at core as a better indicator of where inflation overall is going. Sufficiently, so I think what we'd like to see is credible evidence that inflation is topping out and then beginning to come down. That's what we want to see. Of course, that's what we want to see, and I think it's also, we understand that there are lags, but remember that it's more than a year since financial conditions began tightening. I think the reason we're comfortable pausing is that we are still, much of the tightening took place over last summer and later into the year, and I think it's reasonable to think that some of that may come into effect. So we're I think stretching out into a more moderate pace is appropriate to allow you to make that judgment of sufficiency, with more data over time.
Yeah, as I said earlier, it's going to be core CPI, not this headline CPI.
From the Washington Post. Thanks for taking our questions. I wanted to ask further on the lag effects. When you're considering when you would hike again throughout the course of the year, are there things that you would expect to kick in as those lag effects come into effect that would inform your decisions? Have you learned things over the past year that give you some sense of timeline for when to expect those lags to come into effect?
Yeah. So it's a challenging thing in economics. It's sort of standard thinking that monetary policy affects economic activity with long and variable lags. Of course, these days, financial conditions begin to tighten well in advance of actual rate hikes. So if you look back when we were lifting off, we started talking about lifting off. By the time we had lifted off, the 2-year, which is a pretty good estimate of where policy is going, had gone from 20 basis points to 200 basis points. So in that sense, tightening happens much sooner than it used to in a world where news was in newspapers and not on the wire. So that's different, but it's still the case that what you see is interest-sensitive spending is affected very, very quickly. So housing and durable goods and things like that. But broader demand and spending and asset values and things like that, they just take longer. And you can pretty much find research to support whatever answer you would like on that. So there's not any certainty or agreement in the profession on how long it takes. So, and that makes it challenging, of course. So we're looking at the calendar, we're looking at what's happening in the economy. We're having to make these judgments. Again, it's one of the main reasons why it makes sense to go at a slightly more moderate pace now as we seek that ultimate. I can't point to that ultimate endpoint. I can't point to a specific data point. I think we'll see it when we see inflation, really, really flattening out reliably and then starting to soften. I think we'll know that it's working. And ideally, by taking a little more time, we won't go well past the level where we need to go.
I was curious if you could give us an update on what you're seeing on credit tightening since the bank incidents for March and how you're teasing that out apart from these lag effects.
So it's too early still to try to assess the full extent of what that might mean. And that's something we're going to be watching, of course. And if we were to see what we would view as significant tightening beyond what would normally be expected because of this channel, then we would factor that into account in making rate decisions. So that's how we think about it.
Thanks, Chris Rugaber at Associated Press. You mentioned that many of the trends are in place that you want to see. Core services ex housing has come in pretty low in the past couple of months. And as you noted, a significant portion of core inflation is now housing prices. And then we've had some quirks in used car prices. So given that these trends are in place, I guess I'm sort of asking the flip side of Nick's question, why signal additional rate hikes? Aren't things headed in the direction you need? Why not simply give it even more time?
Great question.
It's surprising to see so much hawkishness in the dots, given what we're seeing recently.
Yeah, so we're 2.5 years into this, or 2.25 years into this, and forecasters, including Fed forecasters, have consistently thought that inflation was about to turn down, and typically forecasted that it would, and been wrong. So I think if you look at core PCE inflation overall, look at it over the last 6 months, you're just not seeing a lot of progress. It's running at a level, over 4.5%, far above our target, and not really, moving down. We want to see it moving down decisively. That's all. Of course, we are going to get inflation down to 2% over time. We want to do that with the minimum damage we can to the economy, of course. But we have to get inflation down to 2%, and we will. And we just don't see that yet. So hence you see today's policy decision, both to write down further rate hikes by the end of this year, but also to moderate somewhat the pace with which we're moving.
Core CPI matters more.
Okay. The last press conference, you mentioned you didn't see wages driving inflation. And, there was some research from the San Francisco Fed suggesting wages aren't necessarily a key driver. But you talked about the labor market today and the need for softening. Can you give us a little more specifically of how you see the tight labor market driving inflation at this point? Thank you.
Right. So I'm not going to comment on any particular paper, but I would say that I think the overall picture is that at the beginning, in early 2021, inflation was really coming from very strong demand largely for goods. People were still at home. They had money in the bank and they wanted to spend, and they spent a lot on goods. And of course, at the same time, and because of that high demand to some extent, supply chains got all snarled up. So prices went way up, inflation went way up. But that was the origin, and it wasn't really particularly about the labor market or wages. But as you move through 21 into 22 and now in 23, I think many analysts believe that it will be important, an important part of getting inflation down, especially in the non-housing services sector, to getting wage inflation back to a level that is sustainable, that is consistent with 2% inflation. And we actually have seen wages broadly move down, but just at a quite gradual pace. So, and that's a little bit of the finding of the Bernanke paper with Blanchard of a few weeks ago, which is very consistent with what I would think.
Michael McKee from Bloomberg Radio and Television. You said in the past that you don't like to surprise markets. It's kind of been the Fed's view. Markets should have an idea of what you're going to do before you go in. You also said a number of times that it would take a while to bring inflation down. You reiterated that again today, and that we would get to a point where inflation could be sticky. So I'm wondering, as we go into the next meetings, how Wall Street or others should look at your reaction function. What will you be reacting to, time or data? In other words, if nothing much changes, if we're looking at the same sort of labor market, the same sort of inflation levels in July or in September or November, will you move because you've said you feel you need to? Is it time that's going to require additional movement, or would it be a reversal in inflation?
So I don't want to deal with hypotheticals about different ways data might move out. So we of course we don't go out of our way to surprise markets or the public. At the same time, our main focus has to be on getting the policy right, and that's what we're doing here, and that's what we'll do for the upcoming meetings. I will say the July meeting will be live, and we'll just have to see. I think you'll see the data, you'll hear Fed people talking about it, and markets will have to make a judgment.
Do you think inflation is likely to continue coming down based on the lags and based on your threat of additional movement, or are we going to be in a period where we're not going to know what's happening?
I think if you look at if you just look at, I'll just point you to the forecast. So inflation is running, core PCE inflation is running at about 4.5%, a little higher than 4.5%, and the median FOMC participant thinks it'll go down to 3.9 on a 12-month basis. This is by the end of this year. So that's expecting pretty substantial progress. That's a pretty significant decline for half a year. So that's the forecast. We do try to be transparent in our reaction function. We're committed to getting inflation down, and that's the number one thing. So that's how I think about it.
Victoria Guido with Politico. Could you talk about the balance sheet and how you're thinking about it? What are you looking for to judge whether we're approaching reserve scarcity, and is Treasury issuance going to affect that? Also, are you considering lowering the RRP rate in order to take some pressure off banks?
So let me say, first of all, on the Treasury part of it, if I can talk about that, and then go back to the balance sheet. So on that, of course, we've been very focused on that for a couple of months, as everyone has. Treasury has laid out its borrowing plans publicly. I think I saw the Secretary's comments yesterday to the effect that Treasury has consulted widely with market participants about how to avoid market disruption, and that they're going to watch carefully for that. So that's from the Treasury, which actually sets the borrowings. At the Fed, we'll be monitoring market conditions carefully as the Treasury refills the TGA. The adjustment process is very likely to involve both the reduction in the RRP facility and also in reserves. It's really hard to say at the beginning of this which will be greater. We are starting at a very high level of reserves and still elevated RRP to take up, for that matter. So we don't think reserves are likely to become scarce in the near term or even over the course of the year. So that's the Treasury part of the answer. We will, of course, continue to monitor conditions in money markets, and we're prepared to make adjustments to make sure that monetary policy transmission works. Was there another part of your question?
Yeah. What are you considering lowering the RRP rate to help take some pressure off banks?
So we have a number of, I would say the RRP doesn't look like it's pulling money out of the banking system. It's actually been shrinking here lately. So I don't think that's not something we've thought about a lot over time. It doesn't really look like that's something that we would do. I think it's a tool that we have. If we want to use it, we can. There are other tools we can use to address money market issues, but I wouldn't say that that's something that's likely that we would do in the near term.
Janelle Marte with Bloomberg. Have you seen sufficient cooling in the housing market to bring inflation down? For example, how does the recent rebound affect your forecast, and how does it factor into monetary policy?
So certainly housing, very interest sensitive, and it's the first place really, or one of the first places that's either helped by low rates or that is held back by higher rates. And we certainly saw that over the course of the last year. We now see housing putting in a bottom and maybe even moving up a little bit. We're watching that situation carefully. I do think we will see rents and house prices filtering into housing services inflation, and I don't see them coming up quickly. I do see them kind of wandering around at a relatively low level now, and that's appropriate.
Do you think you'll have to target that with further rate increases?
Well, I think we look at everything. We don't just look at housing. So I think, the way it works is individual participants sit in their offices all over the country and they write down their forecast, and including their most likely forecast, including their rate forecast. And then they send it in on Friday afternoon and we accumulate it and then we publish it for you. So that's how they do that. Well, I don't know that housing is itself going to be driving the rates picture, but it's part of it.
Thank you for taking the question, Mr. Chairman. Edward Lawrence with Fox Business. So I want to go back to comments you made about in the past about unsustainable fiscal path. The CBO projects the federal deficit to be $2.8 trillion in 10 years. The CBO also says that federal debt will be $52 trillion by 2033. At what point do you talk more firmly with lawmakers about fiscal responsibility? Because I'm assuming monetary policy cannot handle alone the inflation or keep that inflation in check with a higher level of spending.
I don't do that. That's really not my job. We hope and expect that other policymakers will respect our independence on
You ever want to tell your boss that's not my job? Nope.
the judges of appropriate fiscal policy. I will say, and many of my predecessors have said, that we are on an unsustainable fiscal path, and that needs to be addressed over time. But I think trying to get into that with lawmakers would be kind of inappropriate, given our independence and our need to stick to our knitting.
Is there any conversation then about the Federal Reserve financing some of that debt that we're seeing come down the pike?
No, under no circumstances.
That was a dumb question.
Thanks for taking our questions, Chair Powell. So looking at the SEP, it looks like GDP for this year was raised significantly, your forecast for GDP this year. The unemployment rate, meanwhile, was pulled downward. And so should we take that as a sign that the committee is more confident about the prospects of a soft landing, at least as it relates to what you were expecting in March?
I would just say it this way. That I continue to think, and this really hasn't changed, that there is a path to getting inflation back down to 2% without having to see the kind of sharp downturn and large losses of employment that we've seen in so many past instances. It's possible. In a way, a strong labor market is that gradually cools could aid that along. It could aid that along. But I guess I want to come back to the main thing, which is, though, simply this. We we see the committee, as you can see from the SEP, the committee is completely unified in the need to get inflation down to 2%, and will do whatever it takes to get it down to 2%.
SCP is the summary of economic projections. That's the document that I showed you guys earlier. If you've been watching my live stream since the beginning, if you're just tuning in now, if you rewind by an hour in this live stream, I went over that document. So that's what he's talking about right now.
For the future, getting price stability back and restored will benefit generations of people as long as it's sustained. And it really is the bedrock of the economy. And you should understand that that is our top priority.
Just a quick follow-up on that. I'm just a little confused because you said the committee will do whatever it takes to get inflation down over time. But when I look at the SEP, inflation is still projected to be elevated next year, but the Fed funds rate is lower than where it is now. Can you help me understand that?
Sure. So, if you look 2 and 3 years out with the forecast, first of all, I wouldn't put too much weight on forecasts even 1 year out because they're so highly uncertain. But what they're showing is that as inflation comes down in the forecast, if you don't lower interest rates, then real rates are actually going up, right? So just to maintain a real rate, the nominal rate at that point 2 years out, let's say, should come down just to maintain real rates. And actually, since we're probably going to we're having real rates that are going to have to be meaningfully positive and significantly so for us to get inflation down. That probably means that certainly means that it will be appropriate to cut rates at such time as inflation is coming down really significantly. And again, we're talking about a couple years out. I think, as anyone can see, not a single person on the committee wrote down a rate cut this year, nor do I think it is at all likely to be appropriate. If you think about it, inflation has not really moved down. It is not so far reacted much to our existing rate hikes, and so we're going to have to keep at it.
Julie. Sorry, thank you. Hi, Chaparral. Julie Chabanas, AFP News Agency. The May job report showed a rebound in May in Black workers' unemployment. Is it consistent with the Fed's maximum employment mandate? Are you worried about that, about this rebound?
So we are, of course, worried about there are longstanding differences in racial and ethnic groups across our labor market. That's a factor that we can't really address with our tools, but we do consider that when we're thinking about what constitutes maximum employment. It is for us a broad and inclusive goal, and so we do watch that. But remember, all unemployment, including Black unemployment, has been bouncing around right near historic lows, historic modern lows here. So we're still talking about, what is as strong a labor market as we've seen in, a half century here in the United States. So overall unemployment of 3.7% is 0.3 higher than it was measured to be at the last a month ago, but still it's extraordinarily low. And so it's a very, very tight labor market.
Thank you. I want to follow up first a little bit just on the rent question on housing. We heard Governor Waller talk about how, I'll back up, we haven't quite seen the slowdown in rents show up in CPI yet. And we did hear Governor Waller talk about how an uptick in housing might mean that there's not going to be as much relief coming or a shorter bit of relief than we thought. Can you talk about how you're thinking about that and how that played into today's outcome?
I wouldn't say, so that's, as a factual matter, that's correct. We do need to see, rents bottom out here or at least stay quite low in terms of their increases because we want inflation to come down, and rental is a very large part of the CPI, about a third, and it's about half of that for the PCE. So it's important, and so it's something that we're watching very carefully. It's part of the overall picture. I wouldn't say it's the decisive part, but take a step back. What you see is look at core inflation over the past 6 months, year. You're just not seeing a lot of progress, not the kind of progress we want to see, and it's hard to avoid that. And the committee, people in the committee, the median went up significantly, so that the median participant now thinks that core PCE inflation on a 12-month basis will be 3.9% this year. So once again, every year for the past 3 years, it's gone up over the course of the year, and it's doing that again. So we see that, and we see that inflation forecasts are coming in low again, and we see that tells us that we need to do more. And so that's why you see the SEP with where it is.
Could you also talk briefly about your outlook for wages, and given the recent slowdown in core services excluding housing, how far you think wages might need to fall in order to get inflation back in line?
So wages will continue to increase. So we what we're talking about is having wage increases still at a very strong level, but at a level that's consistent with 2% inflation over time. And so I think we've seen some progress. All of the major measures of wages have moved down from extremely elevated, not extremely, highly elevated levels a year or so ago, and they're moving back down, but quite gradually. And we would want to see that process continue gradually. Of course, it's great to see wage increases, particularly for people at the lower end of the income spectrum. But we want that as part of the process of getting inflation back down to 2%, which benefits everyone. I mean, inflation hurts those same people more than anyone else. People on a fixed income are hurt the worst and the fastest by high inflation.
Thank you so much, Chair Powell. Greg Robb from MarketWatch. I just wondered if the committee has talked at all about the labor market, and there's strikes now in Hollywood, and now the United Auto Workers are talking about a possible strike. I mean, aren't workers, some workers have power now and are going to be seeking higher wages. Does that come up in your discussions? Thanks.
So the topic of wages in the labor market and dynamics in the labor market is about as central a topic to our discussions as anything. I mean, it's very labor economics, and the labor market are utterly central. It's half of our mandate, so we spend a lot of time talking about that. I think there are structural issues that are really not for the Fed. And so we don't spend a lot of time, although we take notice of what's going on, but we're not involved in discussions or debates over strikes and things like that. But we look and we see what's going on, and we're making judgments about what it will take to get inflation down to 2% in the aggregate. And as I said, don't think that was about, most folks would say now, it wasn't really about wages at the beginning. And it's becoming more about that as we get into really service sector inflation, which is the part of the economy where we have seen the least progress.
Mark, the last question.
Last question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mark Hamrick with Bankrate. Wondering what your thoughts are now about systemic risk now that we're about 3 months past the failure of Silicon Valley Bank, and also specifically, what are the risks associated with commercial real estate as well as non-bank financials? And could you further elevate those risks with higher still rates, possibly for longer?
So we're trying to think where to start. I'll start with commercial real estate. Of course, we're watching that situation very carefully. There's a substantial amount of commercial real estate in the banking system. A large part of it is in smaller banks. It's well distributed. To the extent it's well distributed, then the system could take losses. We do expect
commercial real estate is in trouble.
There'll be banks that have
you can say that,
and those banks will experience larger losses. So we're well aware of that. We're monitoring it carefully. It feels like something that will be around for some time, as opposed to something that will suddenly hit and work its way into systemic risk. In terms of non-bank financial sector, there's been a ton of work, and clearly in the pandemic, it really was the non-bank financial sector where issues really arose, and there's a lot of work going on with the administration, in particular, leading that to try to address issues in the treasury market and in all kinds of areas in the non-bank financial market.
How is the housing market in the Bay Area, DMAR?
Banks, so that's really our main focus. In terms of the events of March, as I mentioned earlier, we we'll be carefully monitoring that situation. You know, our job generally involves worrying about a lot of things that may go wrong, and that would include the banks. It might be hard for me to identify something that we don't worry about rather than that we do worry about. So we're watching those things very carefully. And as we see things unfold, as we see what's happening with credit conditions and also all the individual banks that are out there, you know, we'll be able to take, to the extent it's appropriate, we can take, if there are macroeconomic implications, we can take that into account in our rate setting. And so I guess that's what I would say.
Do you risk further exacerbating those issues if you get up to another 50 basis points?
So that's, and I guess I meant to address that by saying, as we watch, we'll see what's happening, and if we're seeing the kind of tightening of conditions that you could be referring to, then we can factor that, because really we use our rate tool it really has macroeconomic purposes, so we'll take that into account. Of course, we have responsibility for financial stability as well, and that also is a factor that we're always going to be considering. Thank you very much.
Okay, so that was the end of the press conference. So just real quick to summarize that, Jerome Powell mentioned core CPI at least 15 times. That's how many times I counted it. Yes, I just kind of put a tally on how many times he mentioned core CPI. He mentioned over and over again that the Federal Reserve Committee is paying attention to the core CPI more than the headline CPI. So the headline CPI came in at 4.0%, but the core CPI came in at 5.3%. So it's been decreasing by like 0.1% for the last month or so. And, you know, the Federal Reserve, they're just not convinced that the inflation is coming down as fast as they had hoped. But the reporters and the rest of us in the investment community, we're really confused on the summary of economic projections. And you can go to the FOMC website and take a look at that, because if you rewind this live stream by an hour, I talked about the what they released, the summary of economic projections, and they're still showing very hawkish tone by raising 2 more rate hikes. And I want to basically, they're saying that we're not going to raise the rates today, but we are looking to raise 2 more rates, just 2 more times in 2023. So the next FOMC meeting is going to be in July, and the one after that is going to be in September. They're skipping August, right? So we're going to have 3 CPI readings between July and September. So, but they want to raise the Fed funds rates right now from 5 to 5.25% to potentially from 5.5 to 5.75%. That is insane, in my opinion, because I talked about the PPI, which is the producer price index, right? So the CPI is the consumers, and then the producer is the sellers, right? And that is signaling some significant deflationary indications to the Federal Reserve. They kept asking Jerome Powell, why didn't you raise it today? Why not just raise it today and get it over with? He just kept mentioning core CPI. He didn't really give us a straight answer, in my opinion. Now, let me know in the comment section down below if you saw anything different. But I just feel like the Fed itself is kind of at a civil war in the Federal Reserve Committee. Half the people are hawkish, and the other half are kind of like, let's go ahead and pause it and see what happens, right? So that is really this is probably the most confusing Federal Reserve decision that I've seen in a while. And I just want to make sure that I go through the notes. So right now, the core CPI is showing 5.3% year over year. And Federal Jerome Powell said they're still looking to see that at 2%. And it's just not slowing down as much. And some reporters, they were asking questions about what about the housing? What about the rent? They're still going up, right? Some places are coming down, like the San Francisco, Seattle, Dallas, Houston. That was another city. They're actually coming down slowly, but a lot of places are still going up as far as rents and mortgages, not mortgages, but home sale prices. So it's really difficult for people to buy a house right now. And there's a segment in this live stream that I talked about my real estate investment plan. The way the Federal Reserve kind of made their decisions, it's going to be hard for me to buy any real estate in 2023. But that's for real estate investment, right? For even to buy a primary home, it's going to be pretty difficult if they raise interest rates by another 50 basis points to 5.5 to 5.75%. So 2023 to me, it's going to be like, you know what? I'm just going to sit and watch and see what happens. Because as they raise rates, the likelihood of a recession is even higher, right? Because people are spending less money, so they're hoarding more cash. And what happens is there's a higher probability of a deflation. And deflation is worse than inflation. Okay, I did a video on that a while ago. You can watch that on my channel. So they've been raising interest rates for the last 15 months, and today they finally put a pause to it, but a very hawkish pause. All right. So anyway, if you got anything else you want to see in the future, just let me know in the comment section down below. The next live stream is going to be 2 weeks from now, and I'm going to talk about the debt payoff strategy, especially in a high interest rate economy. And I'm going to talk about what's considered a good debt, what's considered a bad debt, and if that's really a thing right now in the high interest economy. So that's going to be a very interesting live stream, and I hope that you guys can be more interactive and just ask questions about. I'm sure you have like a car loan, student loan, and whatnot. And speaking of student loan, the Department of Education, I do have it saved here. They clarified that the payments will resume in October, not August. So if you're in my private group, I put August on the post, but it is actually towards the end of October. So just keep that in mind. If you haven't been making student loan payments, make sure you log into your website and take a look at your balance and how much interest you're going to be repaying, because you're going to be making repayments soon. That was one of the deals that the Biden administration made during the debt ceiling negotiation, is that the Republican Congress didn't want Joe Biden to pause any more student loan repayments. Okay. That's about it. Wow. This has been almost a 2-hour live stream. I'm going to see what's going on with CNBC. Maybe there was some connection problem, but yeah. And last thing, how about them Golden Knights last night, right? I don't know if you're a hockey fan. Just let me know in the comment section down below. I'm in the Vegas area, if you didn't know, so I'm going to try to go see the parade. I don't know when the parade is, but hockey is awesome in this town. And looking forward to the Raiders and see how they do. But anyway, see you in the next live stream. Bye.